Now, the one common thing I always hear as a lawyer is people work without contracts. So what's that about? Now, in Kenya, employment contracts can either be written or oral. Oral means mnaelewana, tulielewana. Now, clearly, automatically you can see if it's oral, there's a problem, because what happens if one person says we agreed on this and the other person says no, that's not what we agreed. So that's why we always advise, make sure that your contract is written, okay? And the terms of employment is that the timeline could either be a permanent contract or what we call permanent and pensionable, okay? Or it could be a contract that is temporary, all right? Now, permanent contracts do not have a fixed term. They're what we call open-ended contracts. They do not have a fixed term. So you're given the contract, so the assumption is that that contract ends when you either die or you get to retirement, whichever happens first. Of course, many people want to get to retirement before dying, just putting that out there. So that is an open-ended contract. The other side, you have what we call a fixed term contract. So this could be, maybe you get a contract for 6 months, a contract for 1 year, a contract for 2 years, which means the term is fixed. Now, the law in Kenya is that once the fixed term contract comes to an end, that's it, hiyo imeisha. Okay? I know before guys used to say, oh, you've refused to renew my contract. But if the contract does not say that it will be automatically renewed, then once the term is over, that period imeisha and you cannot claim anything else. Of course, we also have what we call casual contracts, all right? Now, these are for short-term or for irregular work. You're probably getting this person to come. Maybe, let's say you are a company and you have a file room that has so many files, okay? So what you need is someone to come and help you sort that out. But you can't give them a 1-year contract because maybe it's work that's going to take a month, right? So you give them, you call them in as a casual. And casuals are paid a daily wage. It's a daily rate. And they are considered separate from employees who are on contract. Now, the contract should generally have your terms and conditions. What are the terms and conditions of your employment? How much are we going to pay you? How long is the contract going to be for? What are the benefits? Are there any allowances that you receive? What's your job description? What are some of the things which, if you do, then you are taken through a disciplinary process? Some contracts will also talk about what the policies are of the employer or of the organization that you work for. All right? Now, talking about fair wages, remember I said earlier that in Kenya, we actually have a minimum wage. And every year, the government will set what it considers to be the minimum wage and say you cannot be paid anything less than this amount. Of course, we find that it doesn't always work, especially in the informal sector, where you'll find people are being paid less than the minimum wage. But yeah, the minimum wage is there and it needs to be followed, okay? And it applies to all workers regardless of their occupation. So employers, remember, it's illegal for you to pay an employee less than what the minimum wage in Kenya is. Now, Kenyan labor law also requires that certain allowances are paid to employees. So if you're an employee, then you have a right to be paid a housing allowance. Sometimes there'll be a transport allowance. There'll be a meal allowance. So if you look at your contract, you may find it's written a gross fixed amount of maybe in a couple 40K, okay? So that means that your employer, when they are paying you the salary, they also factored in the housing. So it's a consolidated salary that has been paid. So it's important for you to know in the industry you're in, what is the minimum wage? Am I getting underpaid? And that could also be a basis for you to ask to be paid better. Now, what about working hours and overtime? There is a bill in Parliament by Senator Cherargei. Cherargei wants to have what we call the ability or the power to switch off. I don't know if you work in those places where your boss can call you anytime. Hata saa sita usiku manze, hey, hello, ile file iko wapi? So the idea behind that bill is to say that after work hours, don't contact the employee. And if you contact the employee, then that should be considered work and you remunerate them for that. That bill is still at the Senate. It's still awaiting discussions. So we're going to see what it looks like. But for Kenya, working hours, the maximum working hours per week is 45 hours. So that's spread out through the days, okay? This means that employees can work 9 hours per day for 5 days a week. But The working hours can also be arranged depending on the needs of the employer and perhaps even the industry you're in, where you can work fewer hours but work more days. I think those of us who work in restaurants, we understand this very well. All right, so you might find that maybe you work, instead of working 9 hours for 5 days, you work 8 hours for 6 days a week. Now, overtime then refers to any work done beyond the regular working hours. And the law in Kenya is that an employee is entitled to overtime pay. And the overtime pay is calculated at 1.5 times the employee's normal hourly rate. So what does this mean? If your hourly rate is 1,000 shillings, then the overtime will be 1.5. Okay? So that comes to 1,500. All right, guys? 1,500 shillings. So that's how we calculate the overtime in Kenya. However, there are some exceptions to the overtime rule in Kenya. Employees who are classified as executives or professionals are not entitled to overtime pay, okay? And sometimes you'll find the employees in certain industries that may have different overtime rules. For instance, in agriculture. You see, kama it's time to harvest, it's time to harvest. You can't say tuna harvest at this. It's 5. I'm done. Me naenda home. Ni 5. Me naenda nyumbani. Now, we're going to take some music, and then when we come back, we talk about paternity and maternity leave. Should you take maternity leave? Who gets to take maternity leave? What can happen during the maternity leave period?
Power Radio. Tune in and power up.